So I have with me today a new friend of mine. He recently contacted me, and we have been talking quite a bit. He is an ex Word of Faith member, and we've been studying the Word of Faith. We've been looking at Word of Faith teachers and all of these things. And so he wanted to come on and share some stuff that I think is very important, not only with his personal story, but also some things about the Word of Faith history, Kenneth Hagin, and things like this. So he is a valuable resource in this. So we're glad to have him on. Steve, welcome.
Thank you, Chuck. It's good to talk to you again, and most happy to be here with you.
Why don't we just kind of start off at the beginning, and you just tell us a little bit about your early life. Did you grow up in the Word of Faith, or what was any of that like?
Okay, all right. Well, we'll go back just a little bit here in time. It's like, yep, I'm an old guy, so so I've been around for a while, and so we'll go back. No, I did not grow up in the Word of Faith or in Pentecostalism or whatever. I remember one time we went by a church when I was real small, and I asked my mom what kind of church that was, and she said, "That's a holy roller." So I assumed that must have been a Pentecostal church. I didn't know what that meant at the time. But at any rate, just to give you my background, I grew up here in the Midwest in Kansas City, in the Kansas City area, Kansas City, Kansas in particular. And when I was real small, we lived on a farm, and then we moved into a couple different suburbs or whatever. And for those who aren't familiar with the Kansas City area, a lot of people don't know. And the reason why I said Kansas City, Kansas is because a lot of people who aren't familiar with the Kansas City area, there's actually two Kansas cities. There's Kansas City, Missouri, which that's the bigger side. That's the side that has the Royals and the Chiefs. And then the smaller side where I grew up on, that's the Kansas side, God's country, if you will. Uh, so at any rate, at least I like to think so. Um, where we have, when I was growing up, it was a nice city to grow up in. Now it's not anywhere near what it used to be. About in the late 70s and the 80s, it kind of went downhill, but it was a growing community, for a number of years, before I was born. And, on my dad, or I'll put it this way, let me back up. My mother's folks, they had been in the Kansas City, Kansas area for a long time. In fact, my great-great-grandparents got married. Great-grandparents got married there in 1897, and so have deep roots in the Kansas City, Kansas on my mother's side. My dad is from southeast Missouri, and then right before World War II, he moved up to this area, but his brother had been working with my grandfather, and then that's how my folks got together. But my dad, when World War II came along, about as soon as he turned 17, he joined the Navy, and then he was in World War II, and he was at the Battle of Leyte Gulf, which was the largest naval battle in history, in October of 1944. And so they had MacArthur on their ship a couple of times, but at any rate, after the war, like a lot of guys, a lot of guys who have been Southern farm boys, moved to the bigger cities of the North, and Kansas City is certainly one of those areas, where people moved to. We had three automobile plants here, two GM plants. There was GM plant in the eastern part of Kansas City, kind of where close to where Arrowhead Stadium and Royal Stadium are at now. And then there's Clay Como had a Ford plant, and then in my area, Fairfax, they had a GM plant there. And then during World War II, they made B-25 bombers. My grandmother worked there. She was an inspector, and she was on the final inspection team before they turned it over to the Army Air Corps. But, kind of interesting. Still have her employee handbook. So,
Oh,
but at any rate, so so like I say, growing up in the community, working class for the most part, and most of the people that I knew, they were similar to me. Their dads, World War II vets, who had teachers or Sunday school teachers who were World War II vets. So I grew up, sadly, most of those guys are gone now. I mean, it's like, I grew up with a lot of World War II vets, sprinkled throughout my life.
Yeah.
And so, at any rate, when we lived on our farm, we went to a small community church. It was kind of more like a Baptist church, but I was too small to really, know, much of what was going on. And so then we moved into one of the suburbs there, and then they sent me and my oldest sister. We went to this. It was a Southern Baptist church. They sent us to Sunday school there, and so we would get on the, how a lot of churches, maybe they do this in your community or whatever, have the church bus go pick up kids for Sunday school.
We've
And
done that before. Yeah.
yeah, and so, so we would ride that, every Sunday, we'd go to the church. They didn't select the church just because it was Southern Baptist. It was just, kind of close, really, per se. And so then we moved out of that neighborhood. We moved further west, but and then in 1962, my dad's brother came to visit, and him and his wife had gotten saved, and so they witnessed to my folks, and so then they decided, it was time for them to do that. Well, I had been concerned about my salvation before that, when I went to that the other Baptist church, and stuff. And then, well, my parents knew my sister. She was going to Kansas City Youth for Christ, which, we in Kansas City, that was a pretty strong organization. So she was going there every Saturday night, and stuff. So the people that picked her up, they went to this as another Southern Baptist church. So they decided to go to church there. And so then the first Sunday we went, my dad went forward, got saved, and then my mom and I, we went forward the next Sunday.
Hmm.
And so this was a church that I spent several years in, from the time I was 10 years old until I was college age. Got good, had some good preachers there, good pastors. Because after I got saved, the pastor we had at that time, he ran you through a course where he made sure that everybody understood the fundamentals of the faith, and he was really good about that. So
Good.
so I grew up. My background is Baptist. So sorry to take up all that time there, but
No, you're good. When was kind of the point where you were introduced to the Word of Faith? Did you have like other faith community influences or anything like that? Or
well, back in those days, at first, no. Where I really ran into this is when I was in college, and
okay.
so I went. At the time, my goal was to be a teacher, a history teacher. Because I love history and still do. It's my thing. I love history and all that. And so lifelong history nut. I mean, I started when I was, well, back in that, about almost that same time frame, when I was 10 years old. And then my grandfather, my mother's dad, me and him, we talked history and baseball. That was our two things. And so at any rate, that was my love. So I went to, at that point, we had Kansas City, Kansas Community College, and I went there, and I was, they had a downtown campus, which it wasn't very far away from my grandparents' house, because they lived pretty close to downtown KCK. And so at any rate, I started going to school there. And well, at the college there, you had, in the hallways and stuff, they had these tables, and you got to know people and everything, people in your classes. And what was funny was I got to know a lot of the guys who went to the rival high school. In fact, the high school that my mom graduated from in 1945. And I got to know these guys. Well, it turned out most of these guys were Pentecostals. And so that's how I slipped into this. And so, and then I had one friend who was a Mormon, and then I had one friend who he was like more like me. He was more Baptist, and everything. And so so our Pentecostal friends, we get together with them, and man, they had all these wild stories about, the different stuff the Holy Spirit was doing and all that. And I was like, whoa, what, what is that all about, and everything. And I don't know what caused it, but me and my friend David, we went to this, we got curious about this stuff, and we went to this bookstore. In fact, it was just a little ways north of Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary in the northern part of Kansas City. And that's where I first saw my books about Kenneth Hagin and stuff. And that's where I was first really introduced to, if you will, the Word of Faith and to Pentecostalism in general. That was my first introduction. Did some reading first. So
Now, I do want to point out, and you've talked about this. We have talked about this together. So I belong to the Assemblies of God. They are Pentecostal.
Yes, I know.
A lot of times we get all grouped together into one thing. There are significant differences.
Yes, there are. Yes, sir. Yes, we are.
And I know my grandpa. He was a Baptist, and he had kind of that mentality, like Pentecostals. They're all like the holy rollers and things like that, And he kind of grouped us all together too.
Yes,
but as we go through this, we're going to see there's some very significant, important differences.
Absolutely.
Between just your Pentecostals, your Assembly of God, and things like that, and your actual Word of Faith. Let me ask you this, and I didn't put it in the questions that I was going to ask you, but I'd like to hear. Do you think? Do you consider Word of Faith a cult?
It's a cult of the mind, in my opinion. It's not a cult in the sense of everybody lives together or anything like that. It's not a sociological cult, but it's a cult of the mind, and it's a mindset. It is, And let me back up too. Is like I say, that's something that I meant to say too. It's like. And I've realized that too. Not all Pentecostals are Word of Faith, and not all word, etc. Which like you say, it's like Baptists. There's a wide variety of everybody. So we're and I know we've talked about that. We're in perfect agreement on that. So
right.
And sometimes I use those terms just interchangeably to as a shorthand thing. But I am very, very well aware there's differences and everything else. So anyhow, but as far as I'm concerned, Word of Faith kind of has its own. It's a mental cult, if you will, in my opinion, and we'll get into that when we get into some of the details of the Word of Faith. I can explain that a little bit more, the reasons why I think that. So
I think that's even true with like your Mormons and things like this. Not every Mormon holds to the fundamentals of Mormonism.
Yes.
A lot of them don't even know what that is.
No, exactly. You're exactly right.
And so I think for those of you, maybe you have Word of Faith relatives or stuff like that, find out what they personally believe, and go from there. But okay, so you were kind of introduced to it in college, in this bookstore. So kind of just walk through some of your experiences. I know that we've talked about one-on-one that there was always this talk of more of the Holy Spirit.
Yes. Yes.
And how it leaves you wanting more, but you can't ever really get that more that they talk about.
Right. Yeah. And that was with me, is like, you reach I'd reached kind of a point, so to speak, where I was like, if you will, hungry for more. That's the best way that I can put it, and it was just like, and a lot of people go through that, where you say, I want more of God, in my life, type of thing,
Right.
And, and it was just like, these guys that I talked to, they seem to be experiencing something that I never had heard of, or never had experienced, obviously, in the Baptist church, at all, but I had to find out more about it, so to speak, and everything. But I sure heard their stories, and I knew a lot of their stuff about, like somebody who got the spirit, and they fell over backwards 10 rows and hit their head on a bunch of chairs and never got hurt. And it's like, what? It's like, oh
Yeah.
my gosh, and and sometimes you didn't know what to quite make of all those stories, but at any rate, it is what it is. So,
Did you attend a actual, did they call themselves a Word of Faith church, or?
Well, that came a little bit later.
Okay.
Let me tell you what happened. What I did was
Okay.
when I first, I got like I say, me and my friend, we got a hold of these books, and this is one that you mentioned. One of the books, I think he got a hold of it first, and then I read it, and that you mentioned on one of your videos recently, where Kenneth Hagin had the one called "The Ministry of a Prophet."
Mm.
And this was and he read that, and I read it too, and he goes, man, that's kind of scary. And I said, yeah, it is, because in that book, and you mention it in your video, where Hagin was transported or whatever into the back seat of the car, where this couple was not, they were not on the up and up, we'll put it that way. and
Right.
and so it's just like, oh my goodness, I'd never had read anything like that. And the other thing too, I want to say as well, which is that a lot of people don't realize that, well, like we're talking about, and you're familiar with them too, which is a lot of these, they're just little booklets, and everything. And Kenneth Hagin actually never wrote anything. What these were, and I remember when I first started reading them, I caught on fairly quickly that these were actually just the written transcripts of his messages, that he never really sat down and wrote a book, and the closest one that he ever really wrote would be the Midas Touch, towards the end of his life, where he dictated that to Billy Brim, I believe, so, but other than that, all the rest of his books were just pretty much just the written transcripts of his verbal stuff, but at any rate, to get back to your question, what happened was, I hung around with these friends, and then my friend David, somehow he got in with these guys a little bit more than I did. And then, then he told me, he said, I received the Holy Ghost. And it's like, whoa, okay. So then I got interested, and they kept talking to me, and I don't remember exactly where we were at. It seemed like we were at somebody's house. So then they said, well, yeah, you need to receive the baptism of the Holy Spirit. So anyhow, so I did that, or at least thought that I did. And of course, one of the things that they did is, as I said, about the speaking in tongues, is they said, okay, now, they start having, well, just speak baby talk, and all this stuff and everything like that. And so then that's, so then I did that. And then they said, okay, you're in, type of thing. I didn't really feel anything or whatever, but it was just, that's how I got into it. And then,
Right.
at that time, the 700 Club was appearing on TV here, so I knew about that. And then there was a big mega church here in Kansas City, that I went with my friend David and some other guy. And I also attended, there was Assembly of God Church, and another friend named David. I know all these Davids. I went to his church, and we would go there on Wednesday night, and his pastor had a course he was teaching, so I sat in on that for several Wednesday nights, and I can't remember the exact. I know exactly where the church was at. It was on Steel Road, but I can't think of the name of the Assembly of God Church. And I know it was Pastor Houghton. His name was Houghton, is all I remember. But anyhow, so. But anyhow, then I can tell you more about Full Faith if you want to know a little bit more about them. So, Full Faith, they weren't really a true Word of Faith church.
Okay.
They were more charismatic, if you will, and they, but that's the first place that I went to where I heard, like being in a service where I heard or saw people speak in tongues, and then there was an interpretation and that sort of thing,
Mm-hmm.
and so that was, where I saw some of that, or prophesying, and there was one that I remember where, it got judged right away, real fast. It's one of the few times I ever saw, anything get judged. This one guy spoke up, and he said, "Go ye home, thus saith the Lord." And then the pastor said, "That's just that man speaking."
Wow.
Ignore that. So,
Wow.
that's one of the few times I ever heard something like that. And so I went there, and so I was going there off and on. Later on in the late '70s, they kind of got into the shepherding movement for a while, and then I quit going. What little bit I was going there. This comes later on in the story, but I'm jumping ahead here. But at any rate, they had their points, and then the other thing too about the pastor Ernie Gruen, he got into it with Mike Bickle, and he had a famous sermon, and then there's an ebook. Well, Ernie passed away in like 2009 or whatever, and then there was one time I went to his house, because he had a daughter in my age category, and I went to her, they had a thing at Ernie's house, and I went to his house, not because I'm a personal friend, but, just happened to go because of the Sunday school class, but at any rate, like I say, I went there off and on, but my deal was I started finding more and more out about Kenneth Hagin, and then I decided once I knew that he had that school, RHEMA, I wanted to go to school there. So, so that's where it kind of, really began for me then. So.
Now I know just from our talking, you didn't spend
Mm-hmm.
a whole lot of time at
Mm-hmm.
RHEMA, but tell
Right.
us about that. Tell us about the time that you were there.
Yeah, well, they opened the school in '74, so I was too late to apply for that class, and see, I was still going to college, and then I decided that I was going to do this, and so this got me kind of out of college, and there's another story behind the college deal too. What happened was when I transferred, I went to the University of Kansas, and they were a little bit picky about some of the junior college stuff that I had. They didn't like that stuff, They were trying to get me to retake almost everything that I'd taken. It was like, geez, Louise, So anyhow, I didn't like that. So and then I was real interested in going to Hagen's school, and so come the next year, when that came around, I did all the stuff. I applied. I wrote the letter, and all that. And I heard from Kenneth Hagin Jr. and everything. And at that time, they didn't have their own campus. They met in Sheridan Assembly. And so then I got all the information. And so then this was then in August of '75, I gathered my stuff up, and I went down there, and I bought a car, which turned out to be a lemon. That was one of my problems that I ran into when I got down there. But at any rate, so I got down there a little bit early because I wanted to look to see if I could find me a part-time job that I could work around the school, and that I could, so I could go to school. I got and I was staying at the YMCA there downtown Tulsa, and so anyhow, so then I drive out there. But I remember the first day I came to Tulsa, I'd never been to Tulsa in my life, and I came down I-44, and then I saw the exit for Sheridan, and I drove past the church. I remember I was raising my hands, praising the Lord, saying, "There it is," everything, and I couldn't wait to go to school there. And then I got settled in, and and then, like I say, we're looking for work, and then come that first Sunday, well, school hadn't started yet, and there wasn't really much to do. And so then, like I say, then I went, and the assistant, I don't know if his official capacity was being the assistant pastor or whatever, but young guy, we were born the same year, Billy Joe Doherty was the speaker that first Sunday that I went. The older gentleman, I don't remember his name, who was the pastor. But they let Billy Joe speak a couple of times. And like I say, I shook his hand on the way out the door. I mean, he would have no reason to remember me or whatever, because, a lot of people went to church there. I mean, it was a big church. So, but I did shake his hand a couple of times, And so anyhow, so, I got there, and then that's when, a couple of problems started happening with the car that I had. And it's just like, oh, geez, And so, I didn't know exactly what to do. And then I was having a hard time finding work. And then, goes from there. And then I went to, there was a lady I remember I talked to, and she wanted to, they had a thing where, they were taking on some RHEMA students. They were RHEMA students themselves, but they wanted too much, and I couldn't afford what they wanted, to pay for stuff. I appreciated their deal, but I couldn't do that, So,
Yeah.
so anyhow, so like say, then once school came around, there was a guy in my class there who, and I don't remember his name, but he was at that time, of course, the presidential elections were on the horizon, and he had been a highway patrolman bodyguard for a governor in Georgia named Jimmy Carter. You know? And so he ended up after graduation the next year. I saw him on the 700 Club. I go, yeah, I remember him, and everything. And so but I don't remember the guy's name, and I didn't get to know him or anything. There was no personal connection there or whatsoever. I think I talked to him briefly, so briefly that, again, you blink and again, he would have no reason to remember me for any reason, shape, or form, because I was just curious about his deal. I said, well, because I think I asked him what kind of guy was Jimmy Carter to work for, and everything. He says he was kind of tough, So, and but at any rate, so then I think it might have been the second week or whatever. You're settling into how they're going to do class stuff. I think Dr. Ken Stewart was the director there at that time, and then Hagen Jr. Did some teaching. Then we had Kenneth Copeland came, for the next week.
Wow.
So and we all thought this was great, because to us, Kenneth Copeland was the embodiment of everything Kenneth Hagin taught,
Well, and I think he still is.
Yes, indeed, and they were, and of course, for many, many years, Kenneth Copeland was the, he was one of the featured speakers at the camp meeting every year after year after year,
Yeah.
and, and everything. And, but at any rate, he spoke to us, and I remember I sat in the second row, and of course there were I think there was like 180 of us or something like that. I don't remember the exact number. I may be wrong on that, but it was in that neighborhood. Maybe there was 200, or whatever. I was probably the first one to drop out. But at any rate, I remember sitting in the second row, like I say, and I looked Kenneth Copeland eye to eye, at that time. I would look him right in the eye another time when he came to Kansas City a couple of years later, and and everything. But anyhow, so like I say, so I was there at RHEMA, and then when I was there, I also bought. That's where I bought I had a couple of E.W. Kenyon books, and I bought the rest of them there because the church had a bookstore, and so I bought all these other E.W. Kenyon books, and so, and then like I say, then I had the. Where that little bookstore was, they had this was the entryway that everybody really used, came off the church parking lot rather than the big main front one that faced Sheridan itself. And so I saw Kenneth Hagin coming in, him and his wife Aretha, they were coming in, and so so I waited. Somebody held the door open for both of them, and as soon as he came in, I stood there and I said, "Hi, Brother Hagin," and I stuck out my hand, and he just ignored me and looked the other way and didn't acknowledge me in any way. I'm shaking hands with the air, and so
Wow.
and so I was like, okay, but I didn't. It didn't bother me. I just thought, okay, I thought he's too busy and important of a man to shake hands with me. So I didn't let it bother me. It just didn't bother me at all at the time, and so anyhow, so. Okay, my time there in Tulsa, like I say, it didn't last very long there at the school, because I had car troubles and everything was going wrong. So I called my parents and they said, just come on back. I felt really bad, because, it's just like here, I thought I was going to start this new life, and I barely made it back because this car was, it was junk, and stuff. So anyhow, so I got back, and then then I decided I went back to school a little bit, and then in '76, but I still believed at this point, and I was buying tapes from Hagin, Copeland. Hagin didn't have a lot of tapes, but he had the books, and then but anybody who came on the scene And then later on, Charles Capps. And as I told you, I met Charles Capps, shook his hand. That comes a little bit later. And but when in '76, the very next year, I had a friend of mine, his name was Bruce, who he was going to go to school at Melodyland School of Theology. They're right down the street from Disneyland. And Dr. Ralph Wilkerson was the director there at that time. I don't know whatever happened to him. And I think you asked me too, it's like, I don't know if he was any relationship to David Wilkerson or not. I
Right.
don't know. He may have been or may not have been. May it just be the same last name. I have no idea, And so that was the first trip I'd ever made to California in my life. Well, we got up that morning, and on purpose, we made it to Tulsa so we could take in the first session of the camp meeting. And I don't remember who I saw at that first session, but I see, because then I went back for all of '77 and '78 camp meetings. I was there for I attended every session, and one of those sessions, somewhere along the line, like I say, I saw Joel Osteen's dad, John Osteen. I saw him. He was actually a pretty good speaker. He was entertaining to listen to. And I saw Jerry Savelle. I saw obviously Copeland and Hagen and the whole bit. But when we walked into that auditorium there in the Tulsa Civic Center in 1976. I saw they had, like there's the stage, and then they had the TV cameras and stuff. Well, I had no idea. Well, who would be broadcasting this? And so, like I say, all of a sudden, these people, this couple comes walking out on stage, and for the lady, like her hair and her makeup walk out first before she does, and that was Jan Crouch, of course,
Oh,
and
wow.
so Paul and Jan Crouch were there. And so, I had no idea who they were because, we didn't get those broadcasts in Kansas City. So I had no idea. But my friend knew who they were because he had been to Southern California. He says, yeah, they've got they had TBS out in Southern California. So I said, okay, whatever. So then what was funny was we saw that session. Then we got in the car. We went on out to Southern California. And then at night, we would watch the rest of the of the camp meeting on TV there, and we go, hey, we were just there.
Yeah.
But at any rate, the other one side story, that was the first time I'd ever seen the ocean in my life. Was that trip, and here I was, in my 20s, and this friend of mine, he had another friend of his that came back with us, and his girlfriend was there, and we met at Huntington Beach. And then I told her, I said, well, up until the day I'd never seen the ocean before, and she was just floored. She could not believe that here's somebody this old, because that was second nature to her. The ocean's second nature. For me, it's like I'd never seen it before. She was. I mean, I might as well have come from Mars the way she looked at me. But anyhow,
Yeah.
just a quick aside story. But anyhow, so we, I did that, and then. Like I say, to make, kind of get to the point here of what you were asking about. So, the rest of '76, '77, I'm buying tapes, I'm doing all this stuff. And I also got involved with a Word of Faith church, and they let me teach because, I did have the teaching in my veins. I'd been I'd had enough college, that I knew I hadn't graduated yet. I would do that later on. That comes later. But at any rate, they let me teach and everything. And then eventually that church shut down, and I went to a Foursquare church. But it was in '77 or so, there, 77, '78, there were two things that happened that's, turned me, well, actually, the first thing that, I'll back up, '76, when we walked into that auditorium, the first thing that hit me, it was the first time that I began to have a little bit of doubt about Hagen and the whole thing, is at the Tulsa Civic Center, and they did this every year that I was there, at least those 3 years that I was there. Now they probably continued it afterwards. There was a banner across the stage, and the banner said, "Teach my people faith." And that bothered me a lot. And the
Yeah.
reason why it bothered me a lot is because that wasn't a scripture. Where's that at in the Bible? I thought it's not
Right.
nowhere. Where did Jesus teach my people faith? It's like, what? I mean, there's faith in the general sense of the word that we're to believe God, but not in the way that Hagen was teaching it. This bothered me a great deal, and that was the first burr or the first deal that kind of got under my skin just a little bit. Then the next thing that happened in 77 or so, I got a tape series from Kenneth Copeland about revelation knowledge. And, it's just like, I knew enough church history and stuff to know about Gnosticism. And that's really what that was, the hidden knowledge, the special ones who have the secret special knowledge.
Yeah.
And and it bothered me a lot. And I listened to that tape series one time and I never listened to it again, and I think I gave it away to somebody, it's like, I didn't want to hear it anymore. I did. And that kind of bothered me, Then the other things that started happening to me, which, I've told you this, which is, there was a lady in the Word of Faith church that I went to, and she came there for prayer. In fact, I went to grade school with their son, so I had a connection there. And I don't remember what her physical ailment was, but she was suffering, she was hurting, And so I canceled both of them, and I went over all the faith stuff. I told them every faith thing that I knew that I'd learned from Kenneth Hagin, and everything. And so they pretty much knew a lot of the stuff already. And so I prayed for her, and I prayed for her more than once, and she never got healed. And then they told me Kenneth Hagin himself had prayed for her twice, and she never got healed. And I'm like,
Yeah.
Man, it's like, that bothered me. And then when I got involved in the Foursquare Church, there was another guy there that I prayed for, and nothing happened, even though he had heard me preach or teach on Word of Faith and everything. And it just seemed like it didn't have any good. And then I noticed in my personal life, a lot of things just were not working out, the way that these guys said it should work out,
Right.
It's like I'm doing all the believing and the confessing. And then that was another thing too. You realize that you were becoming, what I want to say here, you were becoming enslaved, in bondage. That's the word I'm looking for, to your confession, because you got to watch what you say every day. You got to always watch what you say, because if you say the wrong thing, you've destroyed your faith, or whatever,
Right.
and it becomes a bondage sort of thing, and it's just like, well, you don't want that, because it's just like, what you've been believing for the last year or so, now you've destroyed it because you said, well, blah blah blah. And then I began to realize there's this, cognitive dissonance between, you're saying one thing, you're saying I'm healed, but you're not really healed. You don't have the manifestation of it. Or you're saying you're rich, or that you have money, but you don't really have it. You're scraping the bottom of the barrel,
Right.
And, so a lot of these things that, they just didn't flat out work, and to me, and you couldn't tell me that I didn't believe this stuff, because I worked hard at it. I did
Right.
everything I could, and I'm listening to all these tapes, and the stuff wasn't working. And I slowly was getting further and further away from it. And I remember getting the books by Fred Price, and like I told you, I met Charles Capps in person, talked to him for a little bit. I talked to him for about 20 or 30 minutes. And like I say, I think he was trying to get away from me, but anyhow, but but it was just like one of those things where it was slowly. Then the other thing that started happening to me is I started going back over some of these scriptures. And this is the thing that got me more than anything else, is I started reading them in context. And that started to change a lot of things, which is that I realized that what the Word of Faith people were doing and what Kenneth Hagin was doing is the thing that, which as a pastor, I know, the proof texting, which is you grab a verse here, you grab a verse there, and you make a doctrine out of it,
Right.
and that's what they were doing, so anyhow, so I hope that, answer your question on that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I think one thing that you see, and we've talked about this, I want to go into it a little bit more for those who maybe they aren't familiar with what exactly, maybe they don't even know that they're being taught Word of Faith.
Yes, exactly.
Is
yes.
The thing is, they will twist scriptures.
Yes.
Like life and death are in the power of the tongue.
Yeah, that's the classic. Yes, sir.
And they will say that the words that I say are going to manifest my reality.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
yes.
if I keep, they called it positive confession back in the day, like in the 80s and stuff.
Yeah.
If I keep confessing, now they call it like affirmations. I think like Joel Osteen calls it affirmations.
Right. Right.
If I keep saying these things,
Mm-hmm.
they will become reality in my life.
Yes. Yes.
And
That's where I was at. Mm-hmm.
the problem is that if it doesn't, then you're either sinning and God is
Mm-hmm.
punishing you,
Mm-hmm.
or you do not have enough faith.
Yes. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And
And
mm-hmm.
I know from personal experience, I will share my experience more towards the end of this whole study on the word of faith.
Mm-hmm.
But I know firsthand just the bondage that puts you under.
Yes. Exactly.
And it puts
Exactly.
all the responsibility on you.
Yes,
And
it does.
it actually makes you in control of what God can and cannot do.
You got it. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's like you're telling God what to do, and like you say, and if it doesn't work, it's your fault.
Right. So was there anyone you said you know, and this was a big thing for me when I uh first actually got it. This was at the Word of Faith church that I was at. My
Mm-hmm.
pastor
Mm-hmm.
was a RHEMA graduate. His wife
Mm-hmm.
was a RHEMA graduate.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and he started giving me opportunities to preach
Mm-hmm.
and to
Mm-hmm.
teach. I was teaching youth. I've been teaching youth since 2009, but
Okay.
he started giving me actual opportunities to preach. And when I started getting in there
Mm-hmm.
and looking at the context of the Bible,
Yes.
I was like, this isn't what
Yes.
it says.
Exactly. Exactly. Yes, sir.
Um, Now I don't want to get into a lot of my stuff today. It's not about me today. I want to talk to you. Did you have someone that when you presented like, okay, this faith stuff, it's not working the way it's supposed to, or this is this really what the scripture says? When you had these things that started to come up, these questions, these concerns, all of this, did anyone answer your questions?
Well, I didn't really have anyone to go to. There was no one. There was no one that I could really talk to. And I mentioned to you, so I had two sisters that were involved with the stuff, but see, they were living in Southern California by this time. They moved out there, and see, then they were going every year. They were going to Kenneth Copeland's Believer's Voice of Victory, in Anaheim there every year, year after year after year, and they were seeing the speakers. They went to Word of Faith Church there and all that. So I couldn't talk to them because I tried, and it was just like you could tell the temperature of the room, or the temperature of the conversation. It was, but mostly it was by phone, I should say. It was like it would go. I could tell this was, we're going to get mad at each other. So
Right.
I couldn't bring that up with them. And people that I had associated with before, either they were not in my life anymore, or if I tried, it was almost the same thing. They're not going to listen to me,
Right.
type of thing. So I had nobody, and this is a time where there's no internet, there's no books, I was the only person I knew who was in my situation, somebody who had been, like I say, grew up strong, had a good Baptist background, and that's what helped get me out of this. It's like
Right.
it's not so much that it's Baptist per se, but it was a good solid
It was
teaching
a
and
good
solid
foundation.
principles, foundation, and everything, and that's where I what I want to say, it's like, I had that behind me, but there were no resources for me to examine or to do. And then this is where, and I went back to that church Full of Faith for a little bit, but then finally I just dropped out of church altogether for a while. I was shipwrecked,
Right.
basically, and I
Well,
didn't know what to do, but I continued to read a little bit on my own and stuff, so.
yeah.
And then this is where then a few years back, then I decided to get back into this stuff and did some more investigation. And then that's where I'm back to where I'm at today. And, as you know, like I told you, then I started doing some research and I started doing some other stuff. And now, now I'm like, whatever time I have left, on this earth, it's like I thought I want people to know about this stuff,
Right.
and, because again, like what we both have said, this is a bondage type of Christianity, and everything, and it's just not good. It's just not good.
It
That's
is.
all there is to it. Yeah.
And I think two things that you see where I have a very hard time even calling it Christianity. I do call it,
Yes,
I do personally consider it more of a cult
I do too.
because
Yes.
because of the fact that they will either elevate you to
Yes.
Godhead or
Yes.
they will lower Jesus to
Exactly.
your level.
Yeah. Amen. Amen. You're preaching to the choir. Amen. I see the exact
So
same thing. Yes, sir.
either way they do it,
Yes.
they're changing
Yes.
doctrine.
Yes. Absolutely. I agree
And
1000%. Yes, sir.
we've actually, for those of you who are just listening, we've had some pretty fired up conversations. We both get kind of irritated at this stuff coming from it, and
Yes,
it's irritating.
yes, it
That
is.
that you see this is the face of Christianity in
hmm
America,
Yes. Unfortunately. Yes. 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 And
and
hmm
go
yeah.
ahead.
I'm going to say yes. The health and wealth gospel, it's also the underpinnings for so many different things that are going on, like the NAR movement and everything else. There's so
Right,
many things that this is the underpinnings for them. So yeah,
right.
yeah. Go ahead.
And what we have to realize, guys, and we are going to get into some of Kenneth Hagin's teachings and stuff like
hmm
this
hmm
later on.
hmm
Not they'll probably be broken up into shorter segments.
hmm
But
hmm
what we have to realize is this:
hmm
it's the same lie from the garden
Yes.
at
Yes.
its root. It's the same
Yes.
lie from the garden that
Yes.
we can know what God knows,
hmm
that we can
hmm
be like God,
Yes.
that we have this power. And like I said, they even move it to where we hold authority over God
Yes.
himself, and
Yes.
we control God and we constrain God.
Yes.
And I
Yes.
found you said you didn't have anyone to answer your questions.
No.
I
No.
I found the
No.
general consensus is this: they will say, well, that person's just they're negative,
hmm
or
hmm
they don't have enough faith,
Yes.
and you need to just shut them out of your life, and you need to just keep believing,
Yes.
and you need to
Absolutely.
basically just shut up and just believe what we say.
Yeah, and see that's where it's a cult of the mind,
Right,
because it's like it's a mind control sort of thing. It's like shut everything else off, don't listen to anybody else, stay with what we teach you. That's what we were alluding to earlier. This is a cult of the mind. It's not a sociological cult. We don't all live in one spot, but it's a
right.
cult of the mind. To keep you in bondage. Yes, sir.
Well, and I've been looking at a lot of your famous Word of Faith teachers and stuff as I've
hmm
been preparing to go through
hmm
this
hmm
study. I've been out of that church now since 2012.
Okay. Okay. Good.
And
hmm
uh the the stuff that I personally have experienced, like my pastor at my church, he told me, he's like, I don't know how you didn't just walk away from the faith totally.
Yes. Yes.
Just the stuff that you went through, I don't know how. But
Yes.
I really feel like, and I know you feel the same way,
hmm
we had to go through that
Yes. Yes.
ourselves so that we would really know what it
hmm
was like, so
hmm
that we could warn other people about it.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Because I went to absolute, if you will, rock bottom. Maybe rock bottom isn't the exact words, but it was just like sometimes I doubted certain things. I never doubted my salvation. I never
No,
doubted the Lord, so to speak, in a general sense. But I just didn't know what to do or where to go. With anything. It's just
right.
like, and like I say, I got, and I got involved with other things, and all this kind of stuff, and and but I never completely lost my faith in terms of salvation or thinking that I was with the Lord, but I didn't go to church. That was the number one thing, and
Yeah.
I guess part of me was like back in the 60s. There was a book that I remember seeing because I'm a book person. I've always, books is my addiction, if you will. And there was a book out. I never did read it, never bought it or anything, but I know from the cover of the book, it was by a Catholic priest who he had left the faith, and the name of the book was called, Are You Running With Me, Jesus?
Mm.
And that phrase just stuck in my mind. Now, I never read the book, so I couldn't tell you much about it, but that phrase was in my mind for many, many years, and I always felt the answer was yes. Like, no matter what I did, the Lord was still always there with me, even though, okay, I may not be doing a lot of right things. I just,
Right.
I'm still, I'm still okay as far as the Lord is concerned, and it's just like I say, it's just, but I just didn't know what to do, and now I still don't go to church as regularly as I ought, but I have connections
Yeah.
now that I didn't have before, so, and, so,
I
still, go ahead.
I think for me personally, um, I kind of felt like uh I kind of felt like Peter when Jesus asked him, "Are you going to leave me too?"
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
like, where else would I go?
Exactly.
You
Yes.
know,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I knew that the problem wasn't Jesus. I knew that the problem wasn't God.
Exactly.
I knew
Mm-hmm.
the problem was the teaching
Yes.
and things
Yes.
like that,
Yes. Yeah.
and so I actually I understand to a point where people, they just give up on religion and God and
Yes.
stuff when they come out of stuff like this, whether it's
Yes.
Word of Faith or Mormonism or whatever. I
Yes.
understand that, but at the same
Yes.
time, I had this wrestle with me, like, that's the only hope that I have.
Yes.
Where else would I go?
Exactly.
So,
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I've never doubted the Lord because which I've told you just a little bit or a smidgen, I've had several in the past, even, well, before I was involved with any form of word of faith or whatever, I had several spiritual experiences. So there was never a doubt in my mind about the Lord. I experienced a true miracle before I got involved in any of that stuff. I had a real miracle happened to me in June of 1971, or I wouldn't be talking to you right now.
yeah,
And if you want to know about that, I'll gladly tell you. But
if you want to share, go ahead.
yeah, okay. Well, this was, like I say, back in June of 71. And people who've heard this story, sometimes they don't see me for years. They'll say, I remember that story you told, so this is one of those. So like I told you before, when I was going to the junior college and my grandparents lived close, they lived close by, and they had a trailer down on Bull Shoals Lake in Arkansas. For anybody who knows where that's at, it's barely over the border of Missouri, almost straight south of Kansas City. But at any rate, so they were down there, and so I was going to summer school, and then for me, I was taking a couple classes in summer school that I wanted to get out of the way, because summer school is a nice way to get rid of classes that you don't like. For me, it was biology, and I had to have this class in ecology. Ecology was a kind of a new thing at that time, and I'm not
Mhm.
good at either one of those, and I'm not good at math either. Either, So it was like, it was a good way to get rid of classes like that. So anyhow, so when they were down there at the lake, I would go by their house and I would stay there for a few hours. I could study because nobody else was there, and then I pick up their mail, the newspapers, and all that kind of stuff. Give their house the lived-in look, while they weren't there. So I was on my way home. And so, I could still take you to this spot to this very day. So I'm going down the highway here. I left their house, and I'm going about 50 miles an hour. And there's a big, back in the day, people might remember this because I even have friends that had this. They had the pickup trucks that had the big camper shells on them, where you had the big overhang campers above it, where there's a sleeping compartment above the cab and all that kind of stuff. That was kind of the thing. And then people would tow their boats and go to the lake and all this kind of stuff. Well, there's a street there, and this guy's waiting to make a left-hand turn. And so, no problem, and I'm in the passing lane. I'm going to pass him, straight by him. So I'm in the left-hand lane, and I have my right hand on top of the steering wheel, and my left arm is kind of on the edge of the window of the car. Now, the car I was driving, now this is back in the day, which people would find this hard to believe. This generation would find this hard to believe. There's no seat belts. They didn't
Right.
have seat belts in those cars. And I just have my left arm is resting on the edge of the thing. So as I'm driving, no problem. And all of a sudden, I see the word Oldsmobile right in front of me, because the guy behind him decided that, he was tired of waiting. And so he wanted to make that left-hand turn. And all of a sudden, he pulls out right in, he's right in front of me. Okay.
Wow.
So I'm frozen. My hand is on top of the steering wheel. Now, what I'm going to tell you next happened in a matter of just, just as you would snap your fingers, but I can describe it almost in slow motion. So I have my hand on top of the steering wheel, and I felt like on my on my wrist, I could feel the webbing of a hand push up against my wrist. I could feel the thumb, and then I could feel from starting with the small finger right on down, just like playing like a piano keyboard, and it went right down my wrist and grabbed a hold of my wrist firmly, and it steered me perfectly over into the right-hand lane. And I went right around that guy. And if it oversteered, I would have gone off an embankment into a business. Either way I go, but it steered me around perfectly. If that hadn't happened, I wouldn't be talking to you. And I didn't do it. And I felt this hand actually grab a hold of my wrist and steer me over.
Yeah.
And then I went down the road a little ways, and then the shoulder of the road there was a little bit wider, and I pulled off and took a lot of deep breaths. Because it
Yeah.
was like, because again, I wouldn't be here if that hadn't happened. And,
Right.
So it's like I say, that to me is like, and that's one of those miracles. I can't prove it to anybody. I wasn't sick. There was no medical records or anything like that, but it happened to me.
Right. Well, I've had similar things, and I would say this. If you disagree, you can let us know.
Mhm.
I believe that God can work miraculously. I
Mhm.
believe I've seen it done.
Yes.
I've seen
Yes.
what had to be angels or something like that
Yes.
it worked in a situation like you're talking about.
Yes.
I've seen these things.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I'm not doubting them. I'm not doubting God. What I'm saying
No.
is this movement is not it.
Yes. Exactly.
This is a fake.
Yes.
And
yes. Yes.
it dabbles in the occult.
Yes. Yes.
It comes from like New Thought metaphysics and that sort of thing. And it packages nicely
Yes.
as Christianity.
Yes, absolutely.
But it is not Christianity.
Yeah, absolutely.
And for those of you who are listening, don't think that we are heresy hunters or whatever.
Exactly.
We've seen that this movement is not Christianity.
Yes.
And it's dangerous.
Yes.
It will, like Steve said, it will leave you shipwrecked.
Yes.
If it can. It will leave you more hopeless, more desperate, and more empty than when you began.
Yes, absolutely. Well, see, and that's the other thing too. Is like you said, we you have where like I've had some other spiritual experiences as well, and this is like well, like I told you, like right after I was saved when I was 10 years old, I heard the heavenly choir several nights. I heard it, and it's unlike anything you've ever heard. There's no earthly choir that can match this. I've heard it. So to me, it's like you say, I didn't doubt it. And I've had a couple other experiences I won't go into here, but at any rate, it's like you say, this is where we have been there, done this, and see, these experiences happened to me before I was involved with anything with Word of Faith. That had nothing to do with it. And then these people who think because you're going after Word of Faith or Kenneth Hagin or whatever that you're a heresy hunter, like exactly what you said. This is something you and I have lived. This is something that I've been on that side of it. This is something that I I'm not somebody who, the first thing they will also, well, you've never experienced, blah, blah, blah. Yes, I have.
Mhm.
I've got several spiritual experiences. I got a few more that I could tell you about.
Yeah.
So for somebody like that, it's just like, no, I've experienced it. But this teaching is bad teaching, like you said. It is, and it puts the wrong face to Christianity. Is what
Right.
it's doing. So yeah, amen.
Amen.
Uh,
Well, Steve, we're sitting at about an hour.
yeah.
Is there any final things that you want to share in this episode?
One quick thing I would just add is like what we were talking about earlier, is when it becomes your fault, the reason why this stuff doesn't work. And part of my research that I've done, this came up. Marie Woodworth Etter was one of the first ones to say that back during the First World War, and then F.F. Bosworth said this, and then it's a convenient excuse for these guys to use to say, so you don't have enough faith. But
Right.
if you buy my next tape series, that will solve your problem,
Right.
And that keeps you going, because you're like, well, yeah, maybe there's not enough, maybe I don't have enough information, or whatever, so
It kind of reminds me of Scientology in that
yes.
aspect.
Yes, it does. Yes, except that it's, like I say, it's not maybe quite as deadly as those guys are, but it keeps you involved. It keeps you going because you don't think you have enough knowledge,
Yeah.
And so at any rate, but we are guys who know what we're talking about, and we're going to get into some depth, as we know later on, especially with dealing with Kenneth Hagin, and get into some specifics, because that was one of the things that at first I was awed by Kenneth Hagin having all these visions and stuff. Then later on, when I got to really looking at him, going, he never had a real vision of Jesus ever. Sorry,
Right.
that's just the way it is. So,
Well,
anyhow.
and I'll share this later, and I don't say this lightly.
Yes.
I have had dreams in my life, dreams in my sleep that I
Yes.
know absolutely were from the Lord.
Me too.
They
I've
came to
had that.
pass.
Yes.
They came to pass.
Yep.
And
Same here.
so
Same here.
so God, again, guys, God can speak in visions and dreams and stuff. Absolutely. This
Absolutely.
just
I've had
isn't it.
two of them in particular that I could tell you about,
Yeah.
And so yeah, and we might get into that, like I say, later on. I mean, because again, we're again, we're not heresy hunters. We're not people who are saying, hey, I'm just looking at this and this and this. It's just like, but we are people who know what we're talking about. So
Right. All right, Steve. Well, it was good. It was good talking to you, my friend.
Yes, Chuck.
We will I will keep in contact with you personally, and we'll set up our next time to record and all of that. But until then, we'll let you go for tonight.
Yeah, sounds good. And so always great talking to you, and we look forward to continuing this series and helping people out.
All right. God bless.
So, yep, you too. All right, Chuck. All right. Bye-bye.